Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. My name is Theo, and you're listening to Between Two Trains, the train station that brings you great entrepreneurs twice a month. Your hosts are Eric Moss and Van Pappas. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride.
Welcome to another Between Two Trains. I'm your friendly financial planner, Van Pappas.
I'm your better business banker, Eric Moss.
So, Eric, today we are deviating from our normal course of action where we interview local Chamblee and Dunwoody and Brookhaven small business owners. And we have two wonderful people, Beth Ready and Jan Christiansen from the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And so we're going to talk with them about exactly what that organization is. Beth, Jan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Let's start off with Jan. Maybe tell us what your role is, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So I'm the executive director of the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and that's a mouthful. So our acronym is GCADV. And so my role as the executive director is to make sure that the organization is healthy in its programming and its finances and the way that we treat people, and to know what we're doing, right? And so we have a great staff, and we have so many great things that go on at the coalition. But I'm sure that you will get into that, or we'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, Beth.
Yeah, what's your role, Beth?
Sure. So I am currently the vice president of the GCADV board, but my full-time day job is with the district attorney's office in Forsyth County. I'm director of the victim witness program within the district attorney's office there.
That seems like that would be a very appropriate job to be on a board like this.
Yes, very appropriate.
So, Jan, can you start us off with telling us a little bit about maybe some, I know very little about domestic violence. I want you to educate me and the listeners and tell us, how common is this? How many cases in Georgia do we see?
Right. Those are great questions. And so the statistics tell us that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men will be victims of domestic violence or interpersonal violence. And so we know those statistics because we find them all over the Department of Justice, the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the National Network to End Domestic Violence. And so they update those all of the time. We know that women are more prone to being victims of domestic violence, and because domestic violence is about power and control and oppression. And so, and women have often been raised or groomed to be not assertive, not aggressive, to just take a back seat and to kind of do what they're told many times. Of course, not all women. And so oftentimes when we're talking about domestic violence, we will use she as the pronoun when we are talking about somebody who has been victimized. And so when we say the survivor, she was, and that's because women are so much more, have reported being victims so much more throughout their lifetime. And so in Georgia last year, I'm saying this off the top of my head, there were about 130 domestic violence homicides. And and that is not strictly just a survivor or a victim, obviously, in this case. This person hasn't survived. But it is also if a person has killed the victim and then killed themselves or killed family members. And so that is everybody who was involved in the case, whoever lost their life. And so we know that, again, domestic violence is about power and control, and that people who are abusive or who batter their partners, use a number of different tactics to really gain that power and control. And it doesn't necessarily have to be physical violence, right? It can be financial violence, emotional abuse. It can be threatening to take the kids away, which in itself is a form of emotional abuse. And there are a number of things, saying that they're going to kill themselves or the kids or. So there's the threats of violence that often keep that power and control in place. And so somebody doesn't even necessarily even have to get hit. But the threat of that could be very real, depending on the relationship and how it's gone over time. And most times it escalates. It doesn't just stay at this kind of, saying something mean to somebody. I mean, we all do that, right? As people who have partners in our lives, we all don't behave in a healthy way sometimes. And that is in itself is not domestic violence. What we really need to look at is that there's a pattern of power and control in the relationship, and that somebody holds that power over somebody else in a way that is harmful.
I was just going to piggyback on Jan's thing, talking about a lot of times we see the coercive control component in it. And that's often when I hear victims talk, that's the worst type of abuse that they go through, that they will hear, is the control that they're put through in the relationship. So that's a big one.
Well, Beth and Jan, I'm excited that y'all are on. I really think the timing is very appropriate. I know Van and I mentioned that this is a little bit strays from the normal course of business for the podcast, but when you really think about it, we're entering the holiday season, which can be stressful on relationships. We're also in the middle of a pandemic, tough economic times, and also the nature of the pandemic. We've been on lockdown. I would have to imagine that resources that I'm guessing are offered and delivered through an entity like the GCADV. Did I get that right? Yeah, GCADV. I would imagine that y'all are a very important part of times like these normally during the calendar year, but especially during where we are in 2020.
Yeah. And that's so true. Eric, it's, so let me just really quickly, just baseline, explain what GCADV does. And so we are the federally designated coalition for the state of Georgia. So what that means is that we are tasked from the federal government to provide training, technical assistance, resources, a good strategic way to change policy and awareness around the issue. So we're tasked with that from the federal government. And we do a lot of other things, but that's really baseline. And so we're tasked with doing that with all of the domestic violence programs in the state. And so what we've seen, to your point, Eric, is that we've seen an increase in requests for services from our programs across the state. We've seen an alteration in the way many of those services can be delivered. And so, we've seen programs that have had to, house people in hotels because they've been exposed to somebody who is COVID positive, quarantining them in their shelter, offering services virtually like counseling and these kinds of things in the safest way possible, because we all know technology can be hacked into. And so folks have really needed to alter the way that they deliver services. Court services, I'll let Beth speak to that, are different right now kind of in every county across the state, the way that they're being offered, if they're being offered. And so it's really altered the way that domestic violence programs have been able to deliver their services. I do have to say in the programs across the state have done an amazing job at figuring it out. I mean, we host an executive director listserv at the coalition, and they will ask a question and get, policy and answers in real time. And they've just been an incredible resource for one another and have really been able to figure it out.
So organizations, if I have it right, that have a mission for addressing and supporting domestic violence with the end users, have a relationship with y'all, and then you work in conjunction to facilitate and deliver those services, right?
Correct. So we, offer them training on a variety of different things. Whether it's, how to answer the hotline, how to be victim centered. We offer a variety, how to deliver services in a very trauma informed and human centered way. And so we offer a variety of trainings, legal advocacy also. And so as a coalition, we've really had to alter the way we do our trainings. Now they're obviously all offered virtually. Our technical assistance has really been the last several months around helping people to figure out how they can better deliver their services during this very unique time. And so we've been really struck, I think, by, I heard a statistic, or not really a statistic, kind of a factoid from somebody at the National Network to End Domestic Violence, who had been a director of the Louisiana Coalition during Katrina. And she said that what we know is that right after a public emergency, that service requests will go down. And we saw that in Georgia. People are like, nobody's reaching out. What does that mean? And then she said, all of a sudden, the hit the fan. Like people were coming out of the woodwork because they got their immediate crisis figured out. But now the crisis is, I'm stuck at home 24/7 with this person who is violent to me, who is really abusing me and controlling me, and perhaps even being physically violent in some way. And we all know that this time has, and I think you said, Eric, has caused major stressors for folks. People have lost their jobs. They're now working from home 24/7 together all the time. And it's really, really hard for people. And I am not making an excuse for somebody who is violent or for somebody who is abusive, but that can ramp it up. And we know that.
Help our listeners understand, Van, I don't know about you, but when I think of domestic violence, the image that comes to mind is very brute. It's probably more like battery. But there's things, and you mentioned a progression of, coercive behavior, a progression of behavior. What falls under the category domestic violence? What qualifies to be considered domestic violence?
Beth, I'm going to let you answer that.
Okay. The definition I like to use the best, or the way I like to think of it, is it's one partner in a relationship trying to gain control, keep control the whole time. So someone's systematic patterns of behavior trying to maintain control in the relationship. And so, we have in the business, we have a power and control wheel. And in the center of this pretty big, large circle is power and control. And then the outside of the circle, you have violence. Well, inside that circle are all the tactics that abusers use that we all know, that we've all seen in the field. Things like intimidation of kids, intimidation of threats of abuse, any kind of financial abuse, holding the money, not allowing her to work outside, isolating her from her family and friends, lots of, the list goes on and there, gaslighting, minimizing the abuse, flipping it around, making her think that she is in control of the abuse, meaning she, did something that would justify the abuse. So we see all of that inside of that. So, it never amazes me to see a new tactic. They're very different. Every relationship varies differently. And Jan, you can jump in here too if this is incorrect, but I've seen relationships that have had abuse for 10 years and not one physical hit before. It depends on and like I say, the woman in the relationship, the partner in the relationship, because she may have a strong personality and fight back. We know that a substantial amount of our victims fight back, even physically sometimes. And you just have to figure out who the abuser is and who is that person trying to maintain power in the relationship. What do they do when they're losing control in the relationship, such as, a wife doing what she wants to at the end of the day, being late after work, whatever example you want to use. What are those actions once he's losing control of that? And anything in between that, anything he does to maintain that control and balance in his life can be considered domestic violence.
And I have so many questions just from what that you've been saying. So hopefully I can get through them all before we get to the end of the show. And when Eric was saying, what someone like he and I think about, I'm glad you defined that, because the image that always comes into my head personally when I think of domestic violence is that old 80s movie with Farrah Fawcett, The Burning Bed. I know I'm showing my age. Eric probably has no idea what The Burning Bed is. Wasn't that what it was called? The Burning Bed? And
I don't, but the Sleeping with the Enemy is a good one, right?
Sleeping with the Enemy, there's another good one. Yeah. But my main question is, we have a lot of listeners here. Not everyone knows someone or is involved with someone that this occurs to, but what can someone like me or my wife or Eric and his wife, what can we do to help get involved? I mean, obviously, I'm sure y'all take financial donations, but if we wanted to do more than that, is there something that we can do to participate to help this other than just tell the world on our podcast about it?
Yes. I mean, there are, of course, great things that you can do to support somebody. What we often hear from victims is that that their family and friends may cut them off after they found out that they've been victimized and perhaps tried to help them or gave them resources, and the person didn't leave. And the statistics tell us that a person leaves 5 to 7 times, or maybe even higher than that, before they leave for good. And so what I would say to people is if somebody doesn't leave, like when you give them resources or when somebody else is giving them resources or what you think may be a way out, don't cut them off. It is, I've seen so many people who have been victimized just not have any help or resources because they've been in a relationship for however long, and they've tried to leave a few times. And what we know is that, especially for people from marginalized and oppressed communities, it's not that easy. Many of them are not going to call law enforcement because law enforcement may arrest them. We have a program called the Justice for Incarcerated Survivors program, where we work with women in prison who have been arrested for either hurting or killing their abusive partner or committing a crime under duress. And it's amazing the stories we hear. And many of them landed that way because they did not have resources or a place, somebody to reach out to, because everybody kind of really cut them off. And so it's really, really important to stay tethered to somebody, even if you can't maintain that contact. Let them know that no matter what happens, they can call you, because you may not hear from somebody for a long time. Let them know that you believe them, because we hear so many times that people say, well, he's this great upstanding guy in the community, and nobody will believe, or nobody has believed, that he is behind closed doors abusing me. And so, I would just say, let people know you believe them, let them know you're here. If they ever need to reach out or reach out again, we often tell shelters, leave your doors open for people, no matter what you've experienced from them when they've come through your doors. They may be acting out of anger or fear, and many times they'll return. And whether we think it's the right thing to do or not. What we need to remember is that survivors of domestic violence know their abusive partner better than anybody. They know the way they'll react to things. They know the way they won't react to things. They know what they'll do in certain circumstances. And I will say that, even beyond marginalized and historically oppressed communities, like women who know that calling law enforcement will cause a bad reaction on their abusive partner or from their abusive partner will not call law enforcement. They know that they'll likely bond out the next day, and that they'll be right home many times, hurting them again. And so I would just say maintain contact, let people know that you believe them, give them the statewide hotline number, and I am going to give that to you right now.
Yeah, what is that? Do you know that? I hope you know it.
I do know it. Of course I know it. It is so I always have to look at the, it's 1-800-33-HAVEN. And so it is 1-800-334-2836. And that is the statewide hotline number. And, we encourage people to call that number. They'll get connected directly with an advocate who can hear what they're going through, even if they just want somebody to talk to. It does not have to be, look, I'm ready to leave. I'm ready to come into a shelter. I'm ready to get some services. Even if they just want to talk to somebody, call an advocate, and they can at least, listen to you with an open heart and let you know what resources are available if you're ready for that next step.
At the beginning of the episode, you mentioned some statistics, like I think you said 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men, something like that. I may have those numbers wrong. And I wanted to ask back then, and we went down a different path, but what about the LGBTQ community? How is this something that's also a problem in those communities? I mean, do you have any statistics about that?
You're 3 times more likely to be a victim of domestic violence if you're LGBTQ. Yeah.
3 times more likely.
3
Wow.
times more likely. And those tactics that we talked about on the power and control wheel are a little different. That it includes a lot of the same stuff, but also, outing the sexuality of them to family members who don't know, using that against them, things like that. So it's a little bit different, but we do see that. And
you see, I'm very curious because this is something that, whether it's a rural or urban environment, it impacts all socioeconomic levels of society. Demographically, it's not unique to any demographic, but regionally throughout the United States, are there certain hotbeds like Southeast, Northeast, or cities that are typically have increased rates of reporting?
No, not that I know of. It is pretty standard across the board. And in terms of reporting, we know that the numbers of reporting don't really reflect the actual numbers of violence. Many people don't report for reasons I said before, for fear of actual law enforcement or for fear of their abusive partner, how that reaction will be. And so...
or shame. I mean, a lot of have no intention of leaving or telling anyone just because they would never allow their family to know that they've been through this. It's just a very shameful.
Absolutely. Great point, Beth. Yeah.
It's definitely a tough topic. Georgia has launched statewide, has engaged the business community to team up and raise awareness in sex trafficking. Mm-hmm. If you take a Delta Airlines flight, it may have adjusted post-pandemic, but there was a time where there was commentary. If you see something, say something.
And
yes.
Great. Yes. I'm going to take a minute to talk about that because this is my soapbox that I talk about. Jan, you're going to love this too. I feel like if there is a gateway to human trafficking, things like that, it starts with things like domestic violence. And this is a terrible topic, but also child sex abuse. Those first things that you're living in, if you're living in domestic violence and experiencing trauma like that, you're already at such a vulnerable state that you are just, for lack of better words, you are a magnet to a world like that. And it's awful, but it really does start here. And a lot of our research and conversation lately is about getting men involved in this movement. It can't just be women. I know that women hit, we know that women hit, but I firmly believe that they hit for a different reason. It's typically in a heterosexual relationship, there's still a power imbalance between the male and the female. And that's just the way it is. Now, like I'm saying, women commit assaults, but it's typically a reaction or a response to the trauma or abuse they're already in most of the time. That does not mean all cases. I definitely have cases where men do not strike, women strike. But when we're talking about these traumatized victims who are living this kind of lifestyle, there really is a power imbalance. And a lot of that fight, that movement is going to have to come from men. in this movement as well. So I'm very happy to hear that. Sorry, that's my soapbox.
That's good. That's good. So the GCADV, man, that is a mouthful. Just like you said, Eric, it's hard to say. Y'all need to figure out some acronym names so instead I don't have to say a bunch of letters. But what kind of do y'all put on any kind of awareness events? Stuff that we can invite our audience to come to. I don't know. Tell us what y'all are doing for awareness.
Absolutely. Well, this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, so this podcast.
I did not know that. All right.
October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and last week, Beth? Last week we had an event, more of a fundraiser than an awareness event, but we do a race for empowerment every year that does raise a ton of awareness. Now, obviously, we usually do it in the spring. We did not do it this spring. We are doing it this year in November. It will be a virtual race, like most other things have gone to virtual. And it will be the Sunday before Thanksgiving, which is not ideal, but we're hoping that giving people the option of doing, obviously virtual race, that they can do it within a certain time frame. So that's Sunday, November 22nd, and it is normally held at Piedmont Park. It draws a big crowd. It's a great way to raise awareness. We have several hundred participants and cheers, and it's really a great way to really get word out about the issue. We also do a lot of promotion on our website and social media. We're really out there on social media talking about how people can help with domestic violence. We also shine a light on programs, on board members doing amazing work. And sign up, gcadv.org, or Facebook is whatever that is. I'm not a real big techie person. So
do a search for GCADV on Facebook, right?
Look up the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence on Facebook. We also have a Twitter account, and the other one, whatever that other one is.
If one of our listeners wants to participate in the virtual event, is it too late for them to get involved, or?
Absolutely not. If you go to our website, gcadv.org, and you can look for our Race for Empowerment. Obviously, our other event last week, it's too late for that. We're hoping to have our Race for Empowerment in person in the spring. We'll see what happens. I'm cautiously optimistic, but very cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to do that in person. And then next year we have our stand event, and which really is Stand Together Against Domestic Violence. And we do that at Nelson Mullins every year. It's a great way for us to raise some money. We don't get a lot of unrestricted money at the coalition. We're mostly funded by federal entities. This year on our fundraiser, our virtual fundraiser, we are splitting our proceeds with all of our member programs throughout the state. So that's over 50 programs throughout the state. And so we're trying to figure out exactly what that might look like. We don't raise a ton of money at our fundraisers. And I think that's because we don't do local work, so to speak. We don't have a shelter in your town, and we don't actually serve victims of domestic violence except for our deaf advocacy program, our Bridges program. That is a direct service program, but it's a little bit harder to raise money when there's not this kind of thing that you're giving to. So we really try to highlight our program work.
I think we need to do an event here in Chamblee, and I envision like a Hands Across America type thing going through downtown Chamblee. We'll all lock arms through downtown Chamblee Road and make it a big awareness.
How would you do that?
I love it. I love that.
We'll have to talk offline about how we can make something like that happen here in Atlanta. Now, of course, hopefully COVID would have to be gone because we can't be locking arms.
Great.
We'd have to be spread 6 feet apart down Peachtree Road.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
that'd be quite the lunch line.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of that. I love the idea of local communities doing their thing, doing what feels right for them in order to raise awareness about this issue, raise awareness and money for local programs and the coalition. I'm not going to leave us out of it. We really pride ourselves on we've really broadened our scope as a coalition to really look at a really holistic view of violence. And so it's not just domestic violence. We know that violence is all related, right? And Beth is shaking her head, like you talked about human trafficking. It's all related. All oppression is all related to violence. And so we've really done a lot of work around underserved communities. We have some, I want to say, Black and African American survivors die at twice their population rate due to domestic violence in Georgia. So we really concentrate a lot of our work on marginalized and historically underserved or unserved communities. And because we know that for those folks in particular, they may not reach out to law enforcement. They may not even reach out to a shelter. And so we're trying to work with some of those communities in finding ways that they can find community solutions to the violence that's happening. In other words, elders in the communities or people standing in the community, holding folks accountable in ways that are going to make a difference.
Well, we have almost come to the end of our time. Eric, you got another question for us?
Yeah, I wanted just to cast some light on something. If you go to the GCADV website, you'll see the tagline that "We begins with me."
Yes.
And it's something that for a long time I've taken that mantra to heart. And each week I spend time on Friday morning thinking how I can be a better husband, a better son, a better friend. And a lot of people, because we talked about the escalation gradual at first, sometimes it's not a consistent pattern, but sporadic. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times when my wife and I are out to dinner with friends, and these are people we know, sometimes something will happen and it's awkward between a couple, maybe an argument or just some bickering. And you don't want to, you have the feeling you don't want to say something. But I will encourage our listeners out there, your voice matters. You have to be thoughtful on when and how you use it. But something as simple as, I'm not choosing sides, but you should not speak to one another that way, can go a long way. And it can be the start of a healing process. So I just wanted to cast some light that we begins with me, Van. And that means you too.
It's wise wisdom, Eric. I appreciate that. Eric is definitely wise beyond his years. Well, like I said, we're at the end of our episode, and Eric, I appreciate you being back co-hosting. I know you were gone last episode, and our friend Mark Apple sat in for you. He did a great job. I encourage people to go back and listen to that episode with our new restaurant coming to Chamblee. We need to, Eric, figure out how to get Mark on the show more. So, ladies, Jan, Beth, appreciate coming on. I think you gave the phone number, you've given the web address. Is there any other data that our listeners need? That's pretty much everything they need, right? Go to gcadv.org and check it out and sign up and do your part. And we'll talk about what we can do here in Chamblee offline. So thanks again for coming on the show.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.